In your reading of the textbook concerning the issues of abortion and euthanasia, you read 3 chapters there on those subjects. Uh, in all those chapters, there was a central issue that the author mentioned that is at the core of abortion and euthanasia. That issue was a value issue of what is a person, personhood. That's a value decision, just like other values. In fact, the value decision that you make when you define a person is fundamental to most of these ethical issues. Clearly, how a Christian defines a person is different than how a secular person who doesn't believe in God defines a person. That difference affects the way we view euthanasia. It affects the way we view abortion. To be honest, the issue of personhood not only affects those ethical issues, but it really affects the issue of sexual ethics. It affects the issues of how we do government. It affects many, many issues in our work of ethics. So really, personhood is a value issue that is really fundamental to really all of our ethical issues that we discuss, even in the textbook. So in this lesson this week, we're going to begin to talk about, this week and next week, the issue of anthropology, personhood. If you'll look at the yellow block at the top there, it's also called the mind-body problem. Now, there are two approaches to the definition of personhood. Christian or non-Christian, the issue of personhood, as we define a personhood, a person, is divided into either monism or dualism. Now, if you remember last quarter, we talked about monism and dualism, and we talked about those two terms in the context of metaphysics. In other words, if you're a monist in metaphysics, then you believe that all reality came from one source, material or spiritual. If you're a dualist, you believe metaphysically, there are two ultimate sources of reality. So in the field of metaphysics, you have a choice of monism and dualism, which says that all of ultimate reality is either monistic, it comes from one impersonal force, or dualistic, it comes from two, or monotheistic, one personal God created everything. So in metaphysics, we distinguish between monism, dualism, and monotheism. When we're discussing personhood, we're not discussing the issue of reality, we're discussing the issue of what is a person. So what I'm trying to say to you is, don't confuse monism and dualism with metaphysical monism and dualism. The issue we're discussing in the issue of values is a person. Is a person made up of one thing or two things? Monism, one thing. So the definition of monism, when we're defining a person, monism reduces the mind or the body to one property or substance. In other words, monism says that there's not a mind and a body. There's just one, either mind or either body. Dualism, on the other hand, says a person is mental and physical elements, and these mental and physical elements are different, body and soul. So in monism, when we're discussing personhood, you're discussing the person as either a mind and not a body, or a body with no mind. It's just substance, one property. Dualism, on the other hand, distinguishes between body and soul. So as we begin to look, what we're going to look at first this week is the different theories of person in the arena of monism. So now that we've made those distinctions between monism and monism and dualism in the discussion of personhood, let's discuss for a few moments how a monist, a person who views a person as a monistic understanding of personhood or anthropology, how they would view a person. And there are three choices under monism when defining a person: materialism, Another view is called the identity theory, and another view is called idealism. Materialism says matter is fundamental, and everything that exists is dependent on it. In other words, materialism says that all there is to a person is material matter. In other words, your body and your mind is just an illusion. In other words, a materialistic monist will define a person as a person who's just a body, and your mind is just nothing more than what your chemicals and your brain in your brain are making you think. So therefore, you may think you have a soul, but that soul is just something that your mind is saying that you're really just a body, and your soul is an illusion. So materialism just reduces us down to nothing but matter, and our ideas are something that matter is producing, and just completely subjective and not even real. So when you die, there's no soul. You go back to matter, and if you think you have a soul, according to materialists, that's really an illusion. On the other hand, the identity theory says that the mind and the body are two different names for the same thing. Sort of like when we talk about the morning star and the evening star, they're really names for the planet Venus. In other words, when we talk about the morning star and then we look at the evening star, we name those two different things, but really they're the planet Venus. So the identity theory basically says that when we're talking mind and body, there's really no distinction between the two. We're really just mind or we're really just body, and the other part is just an illusion. Idealism, on the other hand, says mind is all that exists, and the body is the only construction of the mind. In other words, idealism says mind is all there is, and our body is an illusion. So these three approaches are the approaches we have in monism. Now, clearly, the biblical definition and understanding of a person is quite different, and we see this in Genesis chapter 1, where in verses 26, 27, and following, God talks about the image of God in man. God created us in His image. Now, what's the image of God? Well, God is an infinite personal being who exists, and He's a person who exists eternally. In other words, God didn't come from an immaterial force or a material force. God didn't come from ideas. God's the source of ideas. God didn't come from matter. God's the source of matter. So God's a personal God who created matter and a personal God who created mind. So God created His humans and He created us in His image. So as humans, we are personal beings. Now, we're not infinite, but we're in the image of God. So that's a completely different dynamic in the way of looking at personhood. In other words, if there's a God, then our personhood, we're individual objective persons because God created us like Him. So therefore, our personhood is not an illusion, not reducible just to matter, or not reducible just to mind. We're a person in the image of God. We didn't all come from one mind, like in idealism, and then we're going back to one mind. We have a mind of our own that's objective, just like God has a mind of His own. So see, the difference is very big. And that affects the way we value a person. We value persons very differently than the way the world does. In fact, the biblical definition of a person is very different than monism in materialism, identity theory, or idealism. These issues are very, very important in understanding that the biblical view of a person is radically different than we find in monism in defining a person. That uniqueness makes us who we are, and actually has us value people very differently than a world who rejects God does.